Hi friends, and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289, here on YouTube. And today we're doing something a little bit different. And you all know how I have an affinity for driving these old cars and fixing old broken things. Well, not driving this car in particular. This has been my legacy project. As you saw, it's got a supercharger up front. And, you know, a lot of things barely work out when you put together a car. This one, things barely don't. So I've had to do a lot of fab work, but maybe 2022 is the year. Like I said, it's my legacy project in the sense of something that's like takes forever to get done. But all of that aside, you know, if you're like me where you like fixing broken things instead of buying new things, because I don't know, you like pain and suffering, which I must, or maybe it's my old trailer park roots where I didn't have any, you know, two nickels to rub together, so I always had to fix things. But anyway, that's prevailed into my later life here. And today, of course, it's my wife's side of the garage, right? You know, so she's a veterinarian and she has to go weird hours. And of course, her garage door opener broke. Now, the hardware is still good. And so I really don't want to change all that out. And so instead of buying a new one, we're going to do something kind of weird. So for my very minute amount of research, this seems to be an older unit, somewhere before 1993, because it doesn't have the photo eyes that was apparently a requirement at some point in history after 1993. So it must predate that. And the hardware in this thing is really cool. I've never actually looked at how a garage door works. And so we'll take a look at that here in a second and jumper some leads and basically run it manually so we can see the mechanisms doing their thing. But all I can figure is the circuit board is bunk on the thing. I've tried about everything. Just show you here what it does. Yeah, not good. So needless to say, not very effective, obviously. And at the moment, my wife's been opening the door manually, and she's like a little 5'4" thing. And before she hurts herself, or honestly, more likely she hurts me because she has to do that, we better get something figured out. So I've really always kind of wondered how a garage door opener works. You know, I've never had a reason to look into it until now. And I'm kind of a mechanization nerd. And this thing is really cool in the sense that it's highly mechanical, but there's a lot of beauty in its overall simplicity. You know, it's just a very low power electric motor on this worm gear, helical gear here that engages another gear. If you can see it in here, quite a bit of debris from wear over the 30 years it's been running. But that goes onto this main shaft, which engages this gear. But the other cool thing about it is actually there's a gear here on the bottom, and it runs this carriage back and forth when the garage door is opening and closing. Now these are your adjusters here for setting where the garage door technically stops. And it's cool is as this carriage goes by, it will actually make connections with these different points that must feed into the controller here on the circuit board and tell it when to shut off. So I think I can utilize that to effectively make a simplified version of a garage door opener. Now disregard all the wires in this box over here. This is our homebrewed garage door opener, which we'll get to in a second. But one other thing that's pretty cool about the original control board is off the motor shaft, it actually has this Hall effect sensor, which basically can sense if the motor is actually spinning. So what I assume the original control board did is if the door was running up and down and it didn't get to one of the limit sensors and it sensed that the motor quit rotating, it would assume that it came into contact with something, and it would probably effectively stop the motor and send the motor back up or whatever, but at least the control board would have known if the motor stopped before it was supposed to, and it could cut power to it in some way, shape, or form. So again, pretty cool little electromechanical mechanism here, simple yet pretty effective. So enough talk, let's just trigger this thing by hand and watch it do its thing. It's pretty cool. All right, we're just gonna jump her right from the hot side here. Originally it would have went through a relay based on the controller inputs and made this connection programmatically, but instead we're just gonna jump right here. You can see everything going to town. The door carriage is going down. You can see this little guy moving. Oop. And we can switch directions by just jumping where we're touching on this capacitor. This is a single phase motor, so essentially it delays the phase on the windings, and so you can control which direction the motor is going by determining which leg this capacitor is hooked to. So I assume there's a couple of relays in there that it would flip either or to put power to one side or the other of this coil, or capacitor rather. So pretty cool. So I think if we utilize that with a couple of relays and this carriage interlock, I think we can make a garage door opener pretty easily. All right, so we're in the little engine workshop here. It's nice and heated, which is a new one for me. Has not been very hard to get used to since, you know, way better than being in a storage unit freezing to death in the middle of an Iowa winter. So naturally, everything's kind of a mess because in the middle of a lot of winter type projects, because what else are you going to do? You can completely lose your sanity here in Iowa. And so anyway, on this project, I think the easiest thing to do is use one of those El Cheapo open source microcontrollers, which they do work pretty good, pretty effective. So I've peeped out some code here with some air handling. So basically if the garage door, say it doesn't move, it's not going to burn the motor up or catch my house on fire and burn it down, probably. And so anyway, let's take a look here and then we'll get this all installed and see if I did a decent job writing the code for this thing. Maybe, maybe not. It'd be pretty sub-ideal to burn my house down, so let's try and not do that. Now I'll be honest, I could have also have done this with basically a simple relay type circuit, but to have the same capability of air handling that I have in this controller, I would have had to have timers and latching circuits and a bunch of stuff that would have got pretty expensive, pretty fast, and just a lot of wiring. And so ultimately, I did choose to go to the microcontroller route, which this one in particular is an Arduino, and they kind of have a bad name, you know, and I've never liked them until recent years because, you know, kind of like you see here, this is how most people's projects end. Wires all over the place. It just looks hideous and unsafe. You know, I'm willing to do this for a test scenario, but ultimately, when I finalize a project that I've done with Arduino and Bluetooth communication, all that, I'll just print out a simple circuit board. And in this day and age, 2021 or so, you can have these printed out super cheap and get them to you, you know, super fast. So there's no reason not to utilize this stuff. And then microcontrollers get really cool and very useful in a hurry and not so ugly like this. Now we still had to use some relays in here, a couple of relays primarily for the 120 circuit to our motor. And so the simplest way I could think to do it is to power one relay when I want the motor to run a direction. And then basically I would power or not power the second relay based on the direction I want to go, where one lead to the motor is hooked to the normally open leg and the other lead of the motor is hooked to the normally closed. So if I don't trigger it, it's normally closed. If I do trigger this relay, it's normally open and it's going the opposite direction. So anyway, let's get this thing all installed and just see how it works and see if my late night coding was, you know, mildly effective or I was just out of my mind when I did it. On the electrical side, nothing too wild. We just cut the power that goes to the board, which is here, and we pulled our wires out that the control board would have signaled for controlling which direction this is running. So again, thing still operates. And on the other side, we've just cut all of our wires associated with this carriage so that we can read those in as well. Nothing too wild. Oh boy, this is where it's gonna get pretty ghetto. I need something to put all that wiring in so it's not just like dangling from the thing. So Tupperware, some of my wife's Tupperware maybe? What do you think? What do you think, old Doge? Chug? Oh, that'll do it. Craft singles. That's a vintage unit right there. And I just remembered that most garage door openers actually have a garage door button that someone can hit from their car. So if I don't do that in my wife's truck, well, probably not going to be too pleased with me. So I said to myself, better find something that works the same. So I had this old little relay that kind of works that, you know, she could use this as a garage door opener. Nothing too crazy wild about it. Here it is here. Gets the signal, and then when the signal's off, it shuts off. So it should work very similar to a typical garage door button in a car. We just had our multimeter set up here, so it's testing the connection. You can see it's got a connection, and then the connection drops off when we release the button. That should work out pretty good. The only place I can think to mount this thing is right about here on the back of the opener. We have a nice hole there at the bottom, so I'll just transfer that. We'll drill a hole, and then we'll have a ghetto mounted box with our Craft Singles logo out. I got everything kind of ghetto rigged here at the moment, wires hanging everywhere, but you know, just to test out, we're plugged in so we can see what the thing's actually trying to do. So now, see if we can run her up. Now I have noticed I have a bug in the system, which we'll try and figure out, and I'll see if I can make it do it. I'm pretty sure I know what I have going on. All right, now we're gonna try and go down. This is usually when the issue comes up. There it goes. It just clicked, moved a little bit. It's because I have an override in there, so I can stop the door partially on its way down. And then if it is stopped halfway down or someplace not totally opened or closed, it's supposed to come back up, but it's jumping into that loop when it's already up and trying to go up again, which, you know, doesn't have anywhere to go. So there we go. Here, I'll show that. So there we go, it stopped. Now this should go into the override where it automatically comes back up. There we go. Okay, so let's find our bug in the system. So this is our override loop right here, and this is our serial readout where we can see what the controller is doing. Anytime I write in here a little serial print line, it's going to pop over where it prints that. So if it's in that area of the program, I'm able to see it. That time it didn't catch it. Stopped. Waiting input. Gonna go back up. And you can see it's in this override right now. So, there it goes. It tried to run override when it was all the way up. And it's because I am a dummy and I'm tracking where the door is in these other scenarios, but the way a program loops is left to right, top to bottom, and it's just continually looping. And if it's somewhere past these points in the program, when I hit the button, I don't have anything to tell it not to run the override. So basically I need to tell it, hey, if it's not on either of the limit switches, then run the override. Just a little oversight in my programming. So let me change that and see what we have. All right, so I added this into the override function here where if it's not touching either of the contacts, that's the only way it can run that loop, which I should have had in there from the beginning. But also I discovered an interesting scenario where I added a delay to fix it, but basically the door would go down fine, and then when it would come up, it would try and run that override anyway, even with those added things in there to kind of interlock the program. And what would happen is when the motor would cut off, the door would sag ever so slightly, and it would actually pull it off of this contact. So now it waits half a second after it sees that contact to cut the connection. So it should be very much so engaged. we can take a look at that little track deal. Over the beams. There we go, and it's off. And now, down she goes. So not too bad. I think I'm going to get some weenie slickum up here on these gears so they quit, you know, deteriorating like they are. So we can get as much out of this garage door opener as we can. And I think we're good. So here it is all done. Everything's contained in the box now and self-sufficient. You know, I don't need a computer, of course, hooked to the thing for it to operate. Ultimately, it'll get a lot smaller when I print a PCB board for it, but on a prototype basis, this is good enough. We'll just leave it kind of raw because, you know, I kind of like the ghetto look of the thing. All right, so I think that'll do it for the garage door opener. Seems to work pretty okay. And, you know, now my wife doesn't have to open the garage door by hand and we can get a little extra life out of this old school garage door unit. Not too bad and didn't take too long really. And just like with tuning engines, you know, programming, it's not like how it is in the movies, okay? You know, you test things, some things don't work, and it takes a few iterations to get things right. Just like setting up the tune on an engine. You make some adjustments, take it for a drive, see how it goes, tweak here, tweak there until you have it. So with that, it just snowed outside, so next order of business is I better go plow our driveway off. Let's go fire up the old 1940s Ford tractor. Had a pretty rough ice storm the other day. Our throttle lever is good and frozen into its spot. Pretty good oil pressure on this old rig.